You know what I think people need to understand is that's what training camp and preseason is for, particularly for young players, Ross, is you want to see them I don't want to call it a mistake, but you want to see them do things that you want to then be able to coach. That's not a negative when you talk about that. These are young players. They're first in the NFL. They haven't played very long. So you want to be able to sit down, watch tape with them, talk them through it.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a teaching tutorial Thursday, which means a couple of things. It means it's presented by DraftKings, who we love. It means it's the last new show that we produce this week in the off season. Although next week's the last week for that. First week of September starts with Memorial Day Monday. We will be doing a show 5 days a week. We are back to daily. Very, very excited about that, including my power rankings. We'll probably do my NFC predictions that week. Should be awesome. As a reminder, even if you don't have any other Ross Tucker football podcasts to listen to or watch, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL the next couple days. Even Money with Steve Fezzik was excellent, very opinionated on certain teams like the Falcons and the Steelers. Fantasy Feast with Joe Dolan. He's doing his tiers, right? So he's on his tiers for fantasy drafts for running backs, quarterbacks, receivers. That's a great one for you to go back and listen to or watch. And the college draft. Brett Whitefield got some kudos from that on YouTube. That'll be our YouTube shout out of the week. David Herbeck made a comment on how much he liked Brett Whitefield on Monday's college draft. Thank you very much, David. Let me know who you want a video shout out for. The sponsor confirmation email winner, Kyle McKechnie. He rated and reviewed the show on Apple Podcasts. The bummer is he wanted to get into the best ball draft. Kyle, I'm sorry that didn't happen, but I made you the sponsor confirmation email winner anyway. And then Bob Thrash made a comment on our social media on Instagram, at Ross Tucker Pod. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. That, though, is why Bob is the spread the word winner via social media this week. I'm spreading the word about Smirnoff because it's the perfect vodka for crafting delicious cocktails that are easy to make and versatile for any and all fans over 21. It's the world's #1 vodka and official vodka partner of the NFL. Long history starting in 1864. Grab a bottle of Smirnoff at your local retailer and head to Smirnoff.com to find recipes of delicious cocktails perfect for game day. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Greg Cosell, Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, Greg. A lot to get into, actually, since last week. I think, last week did we do Wednesday? I think we changed it up a little bit.
I think we did earlier in the week because I was in Nashville at the Titans-Seahawks joint practices.
Well, let me ask you about that first. What jumped out to you? I forgot about that. What jumped out to you about either team or about joint practices? Any thoughts on what you saw from the Titans?
It's so funny you asked me that, and people have asked me, what did I see? It's funny, you end up talking to more people than you watch, because I'll give you a great example. Like, Tim Hasselbeck is now a head coach of a high school team in Nashville, okay? He was there at practice. I talked to him. You know who his offensive coordinator is? Matt Hasselbeck. So, I mean, both those guys were there. Matt Castle was there. So I ended up talking to a lot of guys more than watching, although I'll tell you one thing which you would appreciate that was a lot of fun to watch. The one-on-ones between Leonard Williams and J.C. Latham, the rookie tackle. That was a lot of fun to watch because for Latham, that's a great learning experience playing against a veteran like Leonard Williams, who, by the way, I'd never seen in person. I don't know if you have. He's a big freaking dude, and that was a lot of fun to watch. So I really enjoy almost the one-on-ones, receivers versus corners, pass rushers versus offensive linemen. I find them really intriguing to watch.
I think everybody does, including front office executives and scouts. It's it's a chance to see these guys totally singled up, right, without any other factors. The thing I say often, because I wasn't good at them, is that for offensive linemen, that's not what the game's like. It's not like that.
Right.
It's not like that. It's really just trying to put you in the worst situation
Right. Well,
possible.
that's a great point. I mean, that's very fair because the game is not really like that, purely one-on-ones like that for an O lineman. But yeah.
Which means, Greg, if you're really good at that, boy, that's a good sign. I
The
mean,
other thing I
that's a
found
really
out
good
is
sign.
that Devin Witherspoon likes to talk a lot.
Doesn't surprise me. I
Yeah.
love the way he plays.
Yeah.
Let's keep it in the Southeast, Greg. How about the Falcons? Just in the week since we talked,
Yeah.
they trade for Matthew Judon. They sign Justin Simmons. I love it. I'm still not exactly sure about taking Penix Jr. with the 8th pick because it seems to me like if they had taken another player, boy, they'd really be cooking with gas. But let's start with Judon. Obviously coming off the injury, but Greg, I thought over the last couple of years, I thought he was the Patriots' best player.
And he's also shown over the last 4 or 5 years, it took him a little while when he came into the league, not from a Power 5 school, to become a really quality pass rusher, but he is that right now. And it's clear that they're really making a run because, they obviously have Cousins. They've got Bijan Robinson. They've got a good O-line. You know that. They've got some really good players that people might not be aware of on their O-line. But now defensively, Jimmy Lake is their coordinator. He's always been a master with defensive backs. There's a ton of University of Washington defensive backs in this league, and they are all physical, tough, and competitive. He clearly teaches a certain way that they play that way. So now they have Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates at safety, two veterans who know how to play, super intelligent. And when you have two players like that, there's a lot of options that you have in the secondary now for how you want to play because you know that they can handle the game mentally at a really high level. When you talk to defensive coaches, Ross, and you have obviously, but just to let the audience know, all they talk about is options, what they can do. Everybody knows you got to play man or you got to play zones. That's all part of the gig. But it's the number of things, the volume you could put out there to potentially cause some issues for an offense. And not just the quarterback. Keep in mind, it's not just the quarterback. But it definitely starts with the quarterback because you want him to be in a situation where as he's dropping back, he has to figure out what he's seeing. Quarterbacks want to be in a situation where they're just confirming and validating, not figuring out. And when you have veterans like Simmons and Bates, they are so good at disguise. They understand how to sort of hold their water. That's the term that's used a lot. They don't show what they're doing. So they've got two veteran safeties that will give Jimmy Lake a lot of options.
Simmons has had a terrific career. It's kind of interesting that he was out there for this long. And Judon, to this point, has not gotten a new contract. I think that's going to happen before the season starts.
I would think
imagine
so.
that would happen. But he's not just a good player, Greg. He brings a certain edge and mentality. He kind of brought that from Baltimore, brought it to New England. That's a big loss, I feel like, for the Patriots, although I think it tells me that they have a pretty good understanding of where they are, right? Isn't it interesting? Like a trade like that, Greg, tells you a lot about what both the Falcons and the Patriots think about their teams this year. Falcons think they can win the division and maybe win some playoff games. Patriots realize that's not happening.
No. But, the point about Judon is that was the one thing that the Falcons were lacking. They did not have an edge pass rusher who could win one-on-one. They hope some of the younger players can develop that way, maybe a Zach Harrison. I'm not sure he's that player, but he's obviously a young player, third-round pick out of Ohio State a year ago. But Judon does bring that. He's a player you do have to account for when it's 3rd and 9, depending on the opponent, depending on their offensive tackles. But Judon can win one-on-one matchups. That's what they were lacking in their defense.
Speaking of veteran DBs and how teams view themselves, this one surprised me a little bit, Greg. The Vikings signing Stephon Gilmore. Now, they clearly needed a corner, so that part of it doesn't surprise me.
Yes.
And he has a history with Flores going back to when they were both in New England. I guess I look at the Vikings, and I think they're probably the worst team in the division, Greg. I mean, obviously, if Darnold plays well, maybe they're 3rd in the division. I still think they're far behind Detroit and Green Bay, and I think even Chicago's ahead of them. So I feel like you don't see that very often where a team that not a lot is necessarily expected of goes out and signs a guy like Stephon Gilmore for pretty good money before the season starts.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. And again, we don't know until the season plays out, but they don't have a bad roster. I mean, everybody's going to look at Darnold and feel like, well, gee, he hasn't been very good, so they're not a good team. I think we have to wait and see on that. He's in a really good situation with a really, really good offensive coach in Kevin O'Connell. But talking Gilmore and defensively, they needed another corner. They lost Mekhi Blackman to an injury. He's done for the season. They needed another corner. Gilmore played pretty well last year in Dallas. I mean, he's not what he was, 4 or 5 years ago. And 1 year he was the defensive player of the year in New England. But he still can play man-to-man coverage. He's still a quality player. Their defense is a very interesting defense, Ross. A lot of people might not be aware, but what Flores did last year, you rarely ever see in the NFL. They had the most 3-man pass rushes in the league and the most 6-man pass rushes in the league. It's a difficult defense to play against. Flores gives you a lot of looks. He shows a lot of pressure fronts, 6, 7 guys on the ball. He forces teams to have to protect. There are so many shots. I watched a lot of their defense this summer where you see the quarterback call in the tight end, bring the back in to make sure they're all part of the protection. And then Flores would drop everybody out and rush 3. And they'd have 8 guys against 3 receivers because the offense kept the back and the tight end in based on what the front looked like. So he's really, really good at showing things, disguising things. But you always need corners, and they needed one. And Gilmore, he can still play.
Well, it certainly seems like that is the case. When you watch Stephon Gilmore last year in Dallas, thought he played pretty well. Just like I think Labatt blue lights go down pretty well when I'm with my friends living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Let's get to some quarterback talk, Greg. Before we get into some of the rookies that were named starters, let's get to Gardner Minshew for the Raiders. Been around a while.
Yeah.
Was named their starting quarterback. Interesting decision on some level for Antonio Pierce to go with Gardner Minshew over the youngster Aiden O'Connell, but that's what he's doing. Talked about the operation, the experience. I think Antonio Pierce likes those things. Felt like he had a pretty solid year last year in Indy, Greg.
Yeah, he did. You can line up and play with Gardner Minshew. You have to understand what he is. He tends to be a little too aggressive at times, and that gets him into trouble because obviously he's not a big-armed guy. He's like most quarterbacks. We talk about this a lot, Ross. There's very few transcendent quarterbacks. So when you say that a quarterback has to have a run game or has to have people around him, that's not a knock on a quarterback. I mean, obviously, one of the big keys to this team is their running back situation because they lost Josh Jacobs. So now they have Zamir White. They signed Alexander Madison from Minnesota. That becomes really important to what they do. Their O-line becomes really critical. They drafted the Oregon kid, Jackson Powers Johnson, who I think they're going to play at guard, not center, but I think he can probably do that. But these things become really important because Minshew is a piece. But you can line him up. He understands your offense. He just has to, at times, tone down the recklessness based on situational football. See, it's funny. We hear the term game manager or system quarterback, and people view that as a negative. Those are not negatives because part of playing quarterback is understanding, hey, when do I take a shot? When do I not take a shot? When can I take a sack? When do I come to the line of scrimmage and see what the defense is and know that I have to change a play? Those are all part of game management. And those are critical things. And those are the things Minshew has to do at a high level in this given situation right now.
It seems to me like Minshew's in that category of low-end starter, high-end backup.
Correct.
Right? Like, you can start him. You can win games with him. Probably not who you really want as your starter, but you'd be thrilled if he was your number 2.
Correct.
Like he's in that zone right there, which, by the way, you can play 15 years in that
and he
zone.
will. And he will. You know that. He will.
Let's get to some guys that are just starting year 1. And several of them have already been named the starter. It used to be, Greg, where they'd wait and no, they're not ready week 1, put them in after a couple weeks. Not this week. It started with the Commanders. Not much of a surprise here, but naming Jayden Daniels the starting quarterback. The Broncos then named Bo Nix the starting quarterback. You
Yeah.
were the only one, Greg, I saw anywhere say anything even remotely critical about Bo Nix last week when you said you thought he was playing a little bit fast. Everybody else was like, oh, Bo Nix is awesome. Bo Nix is the man. What did you see this last game?
I thought he was a little bit better. I think he's going to have to fight that tendency early on to stay patient in the pocket when there's no pressure by NFL standards. But he's a good athlete. And I think that's something that comes with experience. What I think people need to understand is that's what training camp and preseason is for, particularly for young players, Ross, is you want to see them. I don't want to call it a mistake, but you want to see them do things that you want to then be able to coach. That's not a negative when you talk about that. These are young players. They're first in the NFL. They haven't played very long. So you want to be able to sit down, watch tape with them, talk them through it. So this is just something that he needs to work on, And obviously he does have enough movement that he is going to make some plays with his legs. I'm not sure he's a true playmaker in that way, but he can make plays with his legs. But this is a really good mix, too, of quarterback and coach. Because even in the preseason, you can see the route concepts that really define things so beautifully for a quarterback. And we're talking about Sean Payton, of course, who's one of the best. And it's just really pretty to watch. You can just see how he understands how the complementary routes attack and challenge the defense and threaten defenders so that the throwing window is clean and the read becomes clean for Bo Nix. But I'm not surprised at all he was named the starter. And one thing, too, he called all the protections at Oregon. And that's a really good transition for him as he gets to the league.
Also, like the fact that he's named the starter, I mean, first of all, the other guys are Zach Wilson, Jarrett Stidham. Secondly, Greg, he started 61 games in college football. I mean, if he's not ready after that, he was there forever. I mean, Jayden Daniels, Greg, there's videos out there of Jayden Daniels throwing touchdown passes at Arizona State to Brandon Ayuk.
Brandon Ayuk, he's another guy that's played a lot of football.
Going for his fourth year in the NFL. Jayden Daniels, obviously, I think we thought he would start, and I think he's going to do well, Greg. I don't even know how much he played, if at all, this week.
He played some, more than he did week one. I think that what stood out to me was his precise ball placement versus tight man-to-man coverage. Didn't play a lot to see a ton. The week before when he did play and he hit Brown on that 42-yarder down the sideline, I thought that he audible to that. It looked like he did. Again, we never know exactly what he's doing, but they were in no huddle. So I don't know if he, you never know that stuff. So I don't want to say it as if I'm 100% certain, but it looked like he did. He's just a comfortable player. They really wanted him in this last game. They focused clearly on him playing in rhythm. They wanted the ball coming out quick. Teams practice things, as you know, and it was evident that they wanted to work on the quick rhythm timing game, have him get the ball out quick. And that's a good thing to do because that becomes so important in this league. You have to play with a refined sense of rhythm and timing in this league at the quarterback position.
Okay. One guy we don't know if he's going to start, but I got a chance to see him play a few series. I was impressed. I thought he did pretty well. What did you see from Drake Maye from the Patriots, Greg?
Yeah, I think Maye, it was a little uneven. I think he played at times a little fast where, the drop did not always sync up with the routes, but that's an easy thing to coach and fix, particularly when a guy gets his first extended action. But then he also did some really, really good things. Because you do the Eagles games, I don't know if you remember the specific plays, but on the first third down that he was in the game, it was 3rd and 5. They basically had two high-low concepts. One outside to the boundary, and it was not clean. And then they ran one inside, high-low in the middle of the field, and Maye just looked to his right, saw it wasn't clean, very comfortably came back and stuck it right on Javon Baker for a first down. You may remember that play. He also had a big-time throw to Baker on the post route that Baker did not hold on to the ball. And what I really liked about that was you saw subtle pocket movement while at the same time manipulating the boundary safety with his head and eyes. So little things like that become important. But as he plays more, he'll slow down a little bit. The timing of his drop will sync up better with the routes. Again, these are all things you want to see so you can coach them, Ross. These are not negatives. People take these as negatives. They're not negatives. Coaches want to see this.
Check him out on social media. He's the man. Love our conversations, usually every Thursday, but not always. At Greg Cosell on social media. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Ross.
I really feel like I learn something every week from Greg. And if I'm learning something, you guys are as well. Speaking of learning, you guys remember those guys I had on last week, future fans? This is the last week of the preseason. We're 2 weeks away now from today, from the regular season. It is time to make sure your children or your friends' children, whoever, they understand football by week 1. You can do this, and you can do it with future fans. No joke, the way future fans teaches, absolutely genius. You won't be disappointed. Check out anything. Check out Amazon. Check out, they've won 6 toy awards. Look at how their ratings that they get on these websites. Go to futurefans.com to learn more. Use my code Ross so they know I sent you, and unlock a lifetime of memories with a kid in your life, usually about age 4 to 8, but you can go 3 to 10 in your life. Starting now. Code Ross, futurefans.com.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, what are your thoughts on the comments from Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa about former head coach, current Vikings DC, Brian Flores?
You don't see that very often. You don't see someone being that brutally honest. I loved it. By the way, that was with Dan Le Batard, part of the DraftKings network, but I loved it. I love that he was honest about it. I'm not surprised. I know Brian Flores. I like my interactions with Brian Flores, but for whatever reason, the Patriot way, the Belichick way is to beat guys down. It's negative reinforcement. I'm not exactly sure why they think that is the best way to go about it. I don't really think it is anymore. And I think that's kind of been proven out with Belichick over the last 5 years. And all of the Belichick disciples, if you will. That would actually be a big negative for me in potentially hiring Belichick, is that part of it. I don't think the constant negative reinforcement really goes over very well with especially these young guys coming out of the NIL era and stuff. I will say I'll give Brian Flores credit. Kind of owned up to it, right? When he talked to the media in Minnesota, kind of said, you know what? Happy for Tua and his success. By the way, I'm not sure I believe him on that. Doesn't really make him look good. But I do believe him when he said, there's certainly some things I could have done better. That was the right way for him to handle it.
Something you talked about with Greg, Jayden Daniels, he is officially the starter for Washington, as is Bo Nix in Denver.
And thank goodness, right? Let's watch these guys play. Let's enjoy watching them play. The thing that some teams do where they act like he's not going to start or not, or they wait a few weeks, they're ready. Let's get some rookie mistakes out of the way as soon as possible so these guys can take the next step as soon as possible.
The Arizona Cardinals, they gave center Yoda Freut a contract extension through 2026, while the Cowboys, they signed defensive tackle Linval Joseph, defensive end Carl Lawson, and then they traded for defensive tackle Jordan Phillips from the New York Giants.
Well, so clearly the Cowboys are not happy with their defensive line depth. You bring in 2 D tackles, Linval Joseph, Jordan Phillips. You sign Carl Lawson. Cowboys not happy with their D-line depth. And I think it's Hilda Froholt.
I got that directly from a name pronunciation from when he was in New England, of him
Freut?
saying it.
Did you say Freut?
I'm pretty sure.
No, that's not right. It's definitely not Freud. But at any rate, keep it moving.
All right. Next thing we've got, Niners offensive guard John Feliciano. He was placed on the IR after surgery. The Eagles, they released tight end CJ Uzomah. Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson, he was limited in practice with, quote, general arm soreness.
Feliciano was the starting right guard towards the end of last year, so that's not good. Uzama, I'm not sure what happened there. I thought he'd be fine for the Eagles as the number 2 blocking tight end. He did not look good at all in training camp, in the preseason. I mean, he was not good against the Patriots last week. And this is not a good sign for Deshaun Watson. General arm soreness for a guy with 2 different shoulder surgeries last year, or shoulder injuries, I should say, not surgeries. That is not good. What is good is becoming a patron. Shout out to Robbie Kurtz, patreon.com/RT Media. Keep them coming. Season's here. Get those even money bets. It's go time. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. By far the best gift you could ever get a loved one. How about Pizza Boy Brewing? I'll be doing an appearance there the first Monday night of the NFL season. So that's Monday, September 9th. Pizza Boy Brewing. Make sure you're there 6 to 8 p.m. if you're local in Central PA. Shout out Sporticulture, HumanHeadNYC.com, BackOfficeScheduler.com.